we're going to look at some basic features of the thoracic cavity of the dog. So far we have removed the forelimb from the trunk. We see some of the extrinsic muscles are still present there. Here we see some of those hypaxial muscles like external intercostals can be seen. The sculliness along with your serratus ventralis is reflected forward, and so we have transected the thoracic wall along the costochondral junctions, slightly below that, as well as along the costal arch. We went up to the 9th intercostal space and slightly behind that to expose or cut the thoracic wall, and then we transected the ribs close to the lateral border of the iliocostalis system. And that's how we have reflected or removed the thoracic wall, and we expose the structures which are present within the thoracic cavity. Removing the thoracic wall, first of all we see the left thoracic cavity, so we see the left lung is completely exposed now. So we see the cranial lobe of the left lung, the oblique fissure, and the caudal lobe of the left lung. The apex of the left lung, the base of the left lung, the dorsal border, the ventral border, and the basal border or basal margin. As we come to the apex of the lung, we see the apex of the lung is situated into the cranial most aspect of the thoracic cavity, or let's call it pleural cavity or pleural sac. If I try to put the first rib back in place, you will realize that it extends further cranially to the first rib, and that is what is the cranial most end of the pleural sac, that is called pupilla pleuri. So let's look at different pleuri which lines the thoracic wall from inside. So we have the pleura which is present on the lung itself, that is your pulmonary pleura or visceral pleura. The pleura which is present on the ribs as well as on the intercostal muscles from inside, that is your costal pleura, which is one of the parietal pleura. Then we have pleura which is present on the diaphragm, that is your diaphragmatic pleura, which is also one of the parietal pleura. By reflecting the lung, we can now see the mediastinum, which is located on the other side of the lung, dividing thoracic cavity into left half of the thoracic cavity and right half of the thoracic cavity. So the transparent structure that you see here, that is your caudal mediastinum, and so the pleura here would be called mediastinal pleura. More specifically, the caudal mediastinal pleura. As I lift up the lung, I expose the heart located below that. It is still enclosed within the mediastinum, and so it is covered on the left side by mediastinal pleura, which is now in close contact with the pericardium, so it is also called pericardial pleura. If I try to pull the sternum slightly ventral, I can still see the mediastinum is present between the heart and the sternum. So the mediastinum is the partition which divides the thoracic cavity into right and left half, runs from the floor of the thoracic cavity all the way up to the roof of the thoracic cavity. I'm pushing the lung slightly down. We can see some connection between the mediastinum and the caudal lobe of the lung. This is what we call pulmonary ligament. We will have to transect the pulmonary ligament in order to take the lungs off the thoracic cavity. We will do that later, and so as we come further, we can fold the cranial lobe of the lung completely, and we see there is no attachment between the mediastinum and the cranial lobe of the lung. So that is your cranial mediastinum. Usually the thymus gland would be located in the cranial mediastinum along with other structures which are also present there, like cranial vena cava, the brachiocephalic trunk, left subclavian artery, vagus nerve, internal thoracic artery. All those structures are enclosed within the cranial mediastinum. So now we are looking at the right side thoracic wall. On this side, we're going to transect all the extrinsic muscles from the caudal aspect of the limb. So we have transected the pectoral muscles. We have transected latissimus dorsi, we have transected trapezius, also part of the rhomboideus, and so now we can flip the forelimb forward to expose the muscles or deeper muscles of the thoracic wall. Here we see scalenus again, we see the serratus dorsalis cranialis, we reflect the serratus latissimus dorsi again, we reflect the external abdominal oblique muscle including part of rectus abdominis muscle. And so we expose the right thoracic cavity and we expose the right lung. The right lung of the dog, we see the apex of the right lung, then we see the dorsal border of the right lung, the basal border of the right lung, and the ventral border of the right lung, where we see cardiac notch which is present between the cranial lobe of the right lung and the middle lobe of the right lung. The cardiac notch where the heart makes direct contact with the body wall. Now on the right side, as we try to pull the lung away from the midline or away from the mediastinum, we can observe the caudal vena cava through the diaphragm going towards the heart. It is located slightly more on the right side, and therefore this cannot be enclosed within the mediastinum. It would not run through the mediastinum, and it has a special fold of the pleura meant for two structures, the caudal vena cava and the right phrenic nerve, which is called plica vena cava. So the membrane that we see here is not mediastinum. It is made up of same parietal pleura, but it is the fold meant for caudal vena cava. So this is your plica vena cava, which usually seems to be running between the pericardium or heart, diaphragm, and the caudal vena cava. If we pull the sternum down, we can see the mediastinum still present between the heart and the sternum. So the mediastinum again from the floor of the thoracic cavity all the way up to the roof of the thoracic cavity. On the right side also, if I try to pull the lung away from the mediastinum, I'm going to observe the pulmonary ligament. The pulmonary ligament can be seen here, attaching the caudal lobe of the right lung to the mediastinum. On the right side thoracic cavity as well, we can see the cranial-most end of the pleural cavity, which in general we call cupula pleurae, that also extends further beyond the first rib. So that is my first rib located right here, and the space actually extends further beyond the first rib. Okay, so we are now taking out the right lung first, and then we'll go to the left side to take out the left lung as well. So as we observe that the cranial lobe is not attached to the mediastinum by means of any ligament, we can see a little larger part of the right lung which is expanded further more on the left side, making the right thoracic cavity slightly larger than the left one. I'm pulling the lung away from the mediastinum. Cutting the pulmonary ligament, leaving part of that attached to the mediastinum, and we expose the accessory lobe of the right lung. The accessory lobe also has some attachment to the mediastinum, so we're going to remove those attachments as well. And here we're trying to take out the accessory lobe of the lung from the mediastinal recess. The mediastinal recess is the space between the plica vena cava and the mediastinum. So we took out the accessory lobe from the mediastinal recess, and now we're going to cut the root of the lung in order to take off the rest of the lung. Lose any part of the other organs. Okay. So here we took out the right lung. Now we see the medial surface of the right lung with the accessory lobe of the right lung. As we have already uh, cut the thoracic wall and expose the thoracic cavity on the left side. Now let's take out the left lung from the thoracic cavity. In order to take the lungs out from the thoracic cavity, first of all we'll need to cut the pulmonary ligament which connects the caudal lobe of the lung to the mediastinum. So I'm going to cut the pulmonary ligament, leaving some part of that attached to the mediastinum, while some part of that would be with the lung. I'm going close to the root of the lung now. Here we have some important nerves that we don't want to really cut, so we're trying to leave them in place. Putting the pulmonary artery, the left primary bronchus is exposed now. Some of the pulmonary veins. Left recurrent laryngeal nerve is in close contact here, so we must mind that structure, making sure not cutting the left recurrent laryngeal nerve. And so here we take out the left lung and we can see the medial surface of the left lung, the impression of the diaphragm, impression of the heart, impression of the descending aorta. This part is more in the associated with the, or this is the apex of the lung, which is present in the cupula pluri, while this is the base of the lung, which is present along the diaphragm. Okay, let's look at a few other things in the thoracic cavity. As we have taken the lungs off, now we can see the mediastinum more clearly, extending from the bottom or from the floor of the thoracic cavity, going all the way up to the roof of the thoracic cavity, enclosing all the organs which are present, everything except the lungs. That is all enclosed within the mediastinum. So here we see the mediastinum and mediastinal pleura. So dividing that region wise, we have the cranial mediastinum, the middle mediastinum, and the caudal mediastinum. The caudal mediastinum, as we have very few things running through the caudal mediastinum, the lower part of that or ventral part of that becomes much transparent. In the upper part of the caudal mediastinum, we still have esophagus running through that, as well as aorta running through that. Okay, as we said earlier, the structures which are present within the mediastinum, they are all enclosed within the inside the mediastinum. So we'll have to cut the mediastinal pleura in order to reveal some of these structures, or to make them clearly visible. We'll have to cut the parietal pleura or mediastinal pleura which is present on the left side of the organs. And so that's how we remove the parietal or mediastinal pleura, and now we can see some of the organs are becoming more clearly visible. We can see the costocervical vein here. We can see the left subclavian artery, which is the direct branch of the aorta. That's the base of the heart. So we have the aortic arch located here, and then from that point backward, this is called descending aorta. The left subclavian artery in the dog as well as in the cat, it is direct branch of the aorta that you see coming outside or coming off the aorta. As we go a little deeper, some more part of the mediastinum. Down here we can see the thymus gland, which is also enclosed within the mediastinum. Along with that we see internal thoracic artery. At this point we see the left phrenic nerve, partly running on the lateral side of the heart and further continuing through the mediastinum towards the diaphragm. Dorsal to the phrenic nerve we have the left vagus nerve and few of its branches. The vagus nerve is also going to continue towards the heart, and it will further continue to the abdominal region. The vagus nerve phrenic nerve. As we observe both of them, we're going to go a little deeper to expose the brachiocephalic trunk. So here we see the brachiocephalic trunk, which is another branch of the aorta. Basically, the brachiocephalic trunk is the first branch of the aortic arch, and then left subclavian artery is the second branch of the aortic arch. After that, aorta is going to go backwards, so it is called descending aorta. The muscles that you see here through the mediastinal pleura, that is your longest scoli muscle on that side, the thymus gland again, so there are a few other structures which are located in the mediastinum that we're going to consider later. But at this point, you can see the left phrenic nerve, left vagus nerve, left subclavian artery, as well as brachiocephalic trunk. We are now back in the right thoracic cavity. We see the cranial mediastinum. As the mediastinal pleura is still intact, we're going to remove part of that in order to expose the structures located below. So here we expose the cranial vena cava. Along with the cranial vena cava, dorsal to that, we see the right vagus nerve, which can be followed further backward, and then we have right phrenic nerve, which is also running along the caudal cranial vena cava. The right phrenic nerve then continues along the lateral side of the heart, same as it did on the left side, but then as it moves further caudally, it accompanies the caudal vena cava, and it is also supported by the plica vena cava. Further, it goes to the diaphragm. So here we have the cranial vena cava, one of the costocervical vein, caudal vena cava, the azygous vein, the esophagus. The aorta, being more on the left side, cannot be seen very clearly from the right, but this is the location for the aorta that you can see part of that running along the roof of the thoracic cavity. So the fold that we already explained, that is our plica vena cava, and then as I go behind the plica vena cava, the probe is now in the mediastinal recess, which is the space between the plica vena cava and the mediastinum. Okay, so the major features that we can see from the right side are cranial vena cava, caudal vena cava, azygous vein, right phrenic nerve, and right vagus nerve. One thing we should note here, the right side thoracic cavity is larger than the left one. Secondly, on the right side we can see the veins more clearly because they are slightly more on the right side, as they have to come to the right chamber of the heart. While from the left side, the major arteries can be seen more clearly, like brachiocephalic trunk, left subclavian artery, as well as the descending aorta can be seen more clearly from the left side. The muscle which is located on the floor of the thoracic cavity, the transversus thoracis muscle. Underneath transversus thoracis muscle, you have your internal thoracic artery and vein running on both sides. Looking at the thoracic wall, as we remove the parietal pleura from the thoracic wall, now as we have flipped the thoracic wall, that is the caudal edge of the rib and that is the cranial edge of the rib. We can see the internal intercostal muscles as we are seeing the inside of the thoracic wall. As we reflect the parietal pleura from the thoracic wall, we observe that the endothoracic fascia is holding parietal pleura attached to the thoracic wall. The nerve that we expose on the caudal edge of the rib is the intercostal nerve. The artery and vein which is going to accompany that nerve along the caudal edge of the rib up to distal 2/3 of the rib, as long as we see this last branch coming forward, that is your dorsal intercostal artery. As we go further downward, the blood vessel that you expose here on the ventral aspect of the rib or towards the ventral end or sternal end of the rib, that is going to be your ventral intercostal artery, which is branch of the internal thoracic artery. The ventral intercostal artery can also be seen on the cranial aspect of the rib, but in upper two-thirds of the rib, the major blood vessel is going to be located on the caudal edge of the rib, and smaller branches would be given towards the cranial edge of the rib. So here we have specific order of the vein, artery and nerve. From cranial to caudal, it is vein, artery and nerve. So the nerve is intercostal nerve, artery is dorsal and ventral intercostal arteries, and similarly veins are dorsal and ventral intercostal veins.